Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls her age. While her classmates spent their evenings watching television or playing video games, she was at the local gym, training harder than most grown men. At 19, she had already earned her black belt in 3 different martial arts and could outrun every member of her college track team. Her dream was simple but ambitious: become the first woman in her family to serve in the military's most elite unit. The Navy SEALs had recently opened their doors to women, and Sarah was determined to be among the first to earn the coveted trident pin. She had spent the last 2 years preparing her body and mind for the grueling selection process known as BUD-S training. The morning of the accident started like any other. Sarah woke up at 4:30, drank her protein shake, and headed to the climbing gym for her daily training session. Rock climbing had become an essential part of her preparation routine. It built the exact type of functional strength and mental toughness she would need during Hell Week. The climbing wall stood 30 feet high, covered in colorful holds that created various routes of different difficulty levels. Sarah had conquered every route in the gym at least a dozen times, but today she wanted to push herself further. She decided to attempt a new route the gym owner had set up the previous evening, one marked with a black tag indicating expert-level difficulty. She strapped on her harness, checked her gear twice, and began her ascent. The first 20 feet went smoothly. Her fingers found each hold with practiced precision, and her feet moved with the grace of a dancer. Other climbers in the gym stopped their own workouts to watch her fluid movements up the wall. But at 25 feet, something went wrong. The hold she reached for, a small, crimping edge that required tremendous finger strength, had been improperly secured. The moment she put her full weight on it, the plastic hold popped off the wall with a sharp crack that echoed throughout the gym. Sarah fell backward into space, her body rotating as gravity took control. Her belayer below tried to catch the fall, but the sudden nature of the hold breaking meant there was too much slack in the rope. She plummeted 15 feet before the rope finally caught her, but by then it was too late. Her right arm struck the wall during the fall, and the sickening sound of breaking bone filled the air. She crashed onto the thick safety mat below. Her arm twisted at an unnatural angle. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, unlike anything she had ever experienced. Within minutes, the gym was filled with paramedics. Sarah remained conscious throughout the ordeal, though tears streamed down her face, not just from the physical pain, but from the realization of what this injury might mean for her dreams. As the paramedics carefully immobilized her arm and loaded her onto a stretcher, she could see the concerned faces of her fellow climbers. At the hospital, the X-rays revealed the worst possible news. She had suffered what doctors called a compound fracture of both the radius and ulna bones in her right forearm. The bones had not only broken, but had shattered into multiple pieces. Fragments had pierced through the muscle and skin, requiring immediate surgery to prevent infection and permanent damage. Dr. Patricia Reeves, the orthopedic surgeon assigned to her case, was gentle but direct in her assessment. The surgery would require inserting multiple metal plates and screws to hold the bone fragments together. Even with the best possible outcome, Sarah would need at least 6 months of recovery time, followed by months of physical therapy. The surgeon's words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her right arm would never be the same again. She would likely regain most of her range of motion, but the strength and dexterity she once possessed were gone forever. For someone whose dream required perfect physical condition, this news was devastating. Sarah's parents rushed to the hospital as soon as they received the call. Her mother, Maria, was a nurse who understood the medical implications immediately. Her father, Roberto, was a retired Marine who had always supported his daughter's military aspirations. They both tried to stay positive, but Sarah could see the worry in their eyes. During the 3-hour surgery, surgeons worked meticulously to piece together the shattered bones. They inserted 2 titanium plates along the length of her forearm and secured them with 14 screws. When Sarah woke up in recovery, her right arm was encased in a cast that extended from her knuckles to just below her shoulder. The first few days in the hospital were a blur of pain medication and concerned visitors. Her college friends brought flowers and get-well cards. Her martial arts instructors stopped by to offer encouragement. Her track teammates signed her cast and promised to keep her spot on the team. But despite all the support, Sarah felt completely alone. She spent hours staring at the ceiling, replaying the accident in her mind. If only she had checked the hold more carefully. If only she had chosen an easier route. If only she had worn different gear. The what-ifs consumed her thoughts and made the physical pain seem insignificant compared to the emotional anguish. Lieutenant Commander James Patterson, a Navy SEAL recruiter who had been working with Sarah for several months, visited her on the third day. He was a decorated veteran with over 15 years of service and had seen promising candidates face setbacks before. But he could see that this was different. Sarah tried to put on a brave face when he entered the room. But the moment he asked how she was doing, she broke down completely. Through tears, she told him that her dreams were over. She would never be strong enough to complete SEAL training with a damaged arm. All her years of preparation and sacrifice had been wasted. Commander Patterson listened patiently, then shared something that surprised her. He told her about other SEALs who had overcome significant physical challenges. He mentioned wounded warriors who had lost limbs and still found ways to serve their country with distinction. Most importantly, he reminded her that being a SEAL was about much more than physical strength. But Sarah couldn't hear his words of encouragement. All she could think about was the weakness she now felt in her dominant hand. When she tried to grip the bed rail, her fingers barely responded. The simple act of holding a water cup required her to use both hands. How could someone who couldn't even hold a coffee mug expect to carry a 60-pound pack through enemy territory? The weeks that followed were the darkest of Sarah's life. After being discharged from the hospital, she moved back in with her parents to recover. The cast made simple daily activities nearly impossible. She needed help getting dressed, cutting her food, and even brushing her teeth. The independence she had always cherished was completely gone. Her physical therapy began 6 weeks after the surgery. The therapist, a cheerful woman named Janet, tried to keep Sarah motivated with small goals and positive reinforcement, but progress was painfully slow. Exercises that should have been simple, like squeezing a stress ball or rotating her wrist, left Sarah exhausted and frustrated. The day she got her cast removed should have been a celebration, but instead, it was another crushing disappointment. Her right arm looked pale and thin compared to her left. The muscle mass she had built over years of training had withered away during the weeks of immobilization. When the doctor asked her to make a fist, she could barely close her fingers halfway. Range of motion tests revealed the extent of her limitations. She could only bend her elbow to 90 degrees instead of the normal 140. Her wrist could barely rotate, and her grip strength measured less than 30% of what it had been before the accident. The titanium hardware in her arm would remain there permanently, a constant reminder of her limitations. Sarah's college friends gradually stopped visiting as the months passed. Her teammates moved on with their training and competitions. Even her martial arts instructors, despite their best intentions, seemed to treat her differently now. She was no longer the fierce competitor they once knew, but rather someone they handled with careful sympathy. The rejection letter from the Navy SEAL program arrived 4 months after her accident. It was written in formal military language, but the message was clear. Candidates with her type of injury were not eligible for special operations training. The letter thanked her for her interest and suggested she consider other career paths within the Navy that might be more suitable for her physical condition. That night, Sarah sat in her childhood bedroom, holding the letter and feeling completely defeated. The walls were covered with military posters, martial arts trophies, and fitness achievements that now seemed to mock her current state. She had spent so many years focused on one singular goal that she had never considered what she would do if that dream became impossible. Her mother found her crying at 2 in the morning and sat down beside her on the bed. Maria had watched her daughter struggle through months of disappointment and could see that Sarah was reaching a breaking point. She reminded Sarah of all the challenges she had overcome in the past and suggested that maybe this setback was preparing her for something even greater. But Sarah couldn't imagine anything greater than the dream she had lost. As she drifted off to sleep that night, she wondered if she would ever feel strong again, if she would ever find a new purpose, or if she would spend the rest of her life mourning the person she used to be. 3 months after receiving the rejection letter, Sarah's life had settled into a depressing routine. She worked part-time at a local bookstore, a job that required minimal physical effort and allowed her to avoid questions about her future plans. Most days, she went straight home after work and spent her evenings watching television or reading, carefully avoiding any content related to military or fitness topics. Her physical therapy sessions had ended weeks ago when her progress plateaued. The therapist had been honest. This was likely the maximum recovery she could expect. Her right arm remained noticeably weaker than her left, and certain movements would always cause discomfort. The metal plates and screws were functioning properly, but they served as constant reminders of her limitations. One particularly gray Tuesday morning, Sarah was organizing the military history section of the bookstore when a customer approached her for help. He was a man in his early 30s with a confident posture and alert eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. There was something about the way he moved that immediately caught her attention. The man was looking for a specific book about unconventional warfare tactics. As Sarah helped him locate it, they struck up a conversation about military history. She found herself genuinely engaged for the first time in months, discussing strategy and leadership with someone who clearly understood these concepts on a deep level. When he introduced himself as Marcus Thompson, a former Navy SEAL who now worked as a private military contractor, Sarah felt her stomach drop. Here was someone who had achieved everything she had dreamed of, standing just a few feet away from her in the place where she now worked because her dreams had been shattered. Marcus noticed her sudden change in demeanor and gently asked if she was all right. Something in his tone made her feel safe enough to share her story. She told him about her accident, her injuries, and her crushed dreams of joining the SEALs. She expected him to offer the usual empty words of sympathy she had grown tired of hearing. Instead, Marcus listened carefully and then said something that completely caught her off guard. He told her that some of the most effective operators he had worked with were people who had overcome significant physical limitations. He mentioned a teammate who had lost 3 fingers in an IED explosion but had become one of the best snipers in their unit. Another colleague had a prosthetic leg but could outrun most able-bodied soldiers. Marcus explained that modern special operations were evolving beyond the traditional image of the perfect physical specimen. Technology, intelligence gathering, and strategic thinking were becoming increasingly important. He told her about a specialized unit within the contractor community that specifically recruited people with unique skills and perspectives, including those who had overcome adversity. Sarah was skeptical. She had spent her entire life believing that physical perfection was the only path to military excellence. The idea that her injury might actually be an asset rather than a limitation seemed impossible to accept. But Marcus was persistent. He gave her his business card and told her to think about what he had said. That evening, Sarah researched everything she could find about Marcus Thompson and his company. She discovered that he was highly decorated, with multiple combat deployments and numerous commendations for heroism under fire. His current work involved training foreign military units and providing security consultation to government agencies. This wasn't someone offering false hope. This was a genuine professional with real credentials. Over the following weeks, Marcus stopped by the bookstore several times. Each visit included longer conversations about military tactics, current events, and Sarah's background. He seemed genuinely interested in her perspective and often asked questions that made her think about problems from new angles. Slowly, she began to feel intellectually stimulated in ways she hadn't experienced since before her accident. During one of these conversations, Marcus revealed more about the specialized unit he had mentioned. It was called Adaptive Solutions Group, a private military company that took on contracts requiring unconventional approaches to complex problems. They specifically sought team members who brought unique perspectives gained through overcoming personal challenges. The group included former athletes who had career-ending injuries, combat veterans with physical limitations, and individuals with specialized skills developed through non-traditional paths. What they all shared was mental toughness, creative thinking, and the ability to find solutions when conventional approaches failed. Marcus explained that Sarah's background in martial arts, combined with her experience overcoming significant adversity, made her exactly the type of person they needed. He told her about an upcoming selection process that was completely different from traditional military training. Instead of focusing purely on physical capabilities, it would test problem-solving abilities, leadership under pressure, and adaptability. Sarah's initial reaction was defensive. She felt like Marcus was offering her some kind of consolation prize, a lesser version of what she had really wanted. But as he continued to explain the nature of their work, she began to understand that this opportunity might actually be more challenging and meaningful than anything she had previously imagined. The Adaptive Solutions Group took on missions that regular military units couldn't handle effectively. They worked in situations where blending in with civilian populations was crucial, where traditional military tactics would fail, and where success depended more on intelligence and creativity than overwhelming force. Their recent assignments had included extracting kidnapped diplomats from urban environments, gathering intelligence in hostile territories, and training allied forces in unconventional warfare techniques. Marcus arranged for Sarah to meet with Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a psychologist who worked with the Adaptive Solutions Group to evaluate potential candidates. Dr. Rodriguez had extensive experience working with high-performing individuals who had faced significant setbacks, and she specialized in helping people rediscover their potential after traumatic experiences. Their first meeting took place at a small coffee shop downtown. Dr. Rodriguez was a warm, intelligent woman who immediately put Sarah at ease. Instead of asking about her injury or limitations, she focused on Sarah's mental approach to training, her problem-solving methods, and her motivation for pursuing military service. Through their conversation, Dr. Rodriguez helped Sarah realize that her injury had actually strengthened certain aspects of her character. The months of struggle and adaptation had developed her patience, creativity, and determination in ways that her previous successes never could have. She had learned to find alternative solutions when the obvious path was blocked, a skill that was invaluable in special operations work. Dr. Rodriguez also pointed out that Sarah's experience with physical limitations gave her insights that could be crucial when working with wounded allies or when operating in situations where team members might be injured. She understood firsthand what it meant to adapt and overcome, knowledge that couldn't be taught in any training program. Over several weeks of meetings, Dr. Rodriguez guided Sarah through exercises designed to rebuild her confidence and help her recognize her own capabilities. They worked on visualization techniques, goal-setting strategies, and methods for managing the fear of failure that had paralyzed Sarah since her accident. The breakthrough came during a role-playing exercise where Dr. Rodriguez presented Sarah with a complex tactical scenario. A team was trapped in hostile territory with one member severely injured. Traditional extraction methods were impossible, and conventional military backup was hours away. Sarah needed to develop a plan using only the resources immediately available. Sarah's mind immediately began working through the problem. She considered the injured team members' limitations not as weaknesses, but as factors that would influence their approach. She developed a creative solution that used misdirection and unconventional movement patterns to avoid enemy detection while slowly moving toward a safe extraction point. When she finished outlining her plan, Dr. Rodriguez smiled and told her that she had just demonstrated exactly the type of thinking that made Adaptive Solutions Group effective. Sarah had approached the problem not by trying to overcome the limitations, but by incorporating them into a strategy that actually made the team stronger. For the first time since her accident, Sarah felt a spark of her old confidence returning. She realized that she had been thinking about her injury all wrong. Instead of seeing it as the end of her military dreams, she could view it as preparation for a different and potentially more meaningful path. Marcus introduced her to other members of the Adaptive Solutions Group over the following month. She met Jennifer Walsh, a former Army Ranger who had lost partial use of her left leg in a helicopter crash, but had become one of their most effective urban operations specialists. She spoke with David Chen, a former Marine who had severe scarring from burns sustained in combat, but had developed extraordinary skills in psychological operations. Each person she met had a similar story: a military dream that seemed destroyed by injury or circumstance, followed by a period of despair and self-doubt, and finally the discovery of new possibilities that they had never previously imagined. They weren't lesser versions of traditional soldiers. They were highly specialized operators who approached challenges from angles that conventional forces couldn't match. The selection process for Adaptive Solutions Group was scheduled to begin in 6 weeks. Unlike traditional military selection, it would take place over several months and would focus on real-world problem-solving rather than pure physical endurance. Candidates would be evaluated on their ability to adapt to changing circumstances, work effectively with limited resources, and maintain performance under psychological pressure. Sarah decided to accept the challenge. For the first time in over a year, she had a goal that excited rather than intimidated her. She began preparing for selection not by trying to rebuild her lost physical strength, but by developing new skills that would complement her existing abilities. She studied languages, practiced technical skills, and most importantly, learned to think of herself not as a disabled person trying to compensate for weakness, but as a specialist with unique capabilities. The night before selection began, Sarah called her parents to let them know what she was doing. Her mother cried, not from worry, but from joy at hearing strength and determination back in her daughter's voice. Her father, the retired Marine, told her that he had never been more proud of her courage. As Sarah packed her gear for the selection process, she realized that her journey had come full circle. She was once again preparing for the most challenging experience of her life, but this time she wasn't trying to prove she could be like everyone else. She was preparing to show that her unique perspective and hard-won resilience made her exactly what her team needed. The Adaptive Solutions Group selection process began on a cold Monday morning at a remote training facility in Colorado. Unlike the massive groups that typically attempted Navy SEAL training, only 12 candidates had been invited to participate. Each person brought a unique background and set of circumstances that had led them to this unconventional path. Sarah arrived at the facility feeling nervous but determined. The other candidates included a former Olympic swimmer who had suffered a career-ending back injury, a combat veteran with hearing loss, a former Air Force pilot with vision limitations, and several others whose stories she would learn over the coming weeks. The first week focused on psychological evaluation and team-building exercises rather than physical challenges. Candidates were divided into small groups and presented with increasingly complex scenarios that required creative solutions. Sarah found herself naturally taking on leadership roles, her experience overcoming adversity giving her perspective that others lacked. One of the early exercises involved planning an extraction mission for civilians trapped in a hostile urban environment. While other candidates focused on overwhelming force or high-tech solutions, Sarah developed a plan that relied on patience, careful observation, and exploiting enemy assumptions about what a rescue team would look like. Her plan involved disguising the team members as aid workers and moving through the city slowly over several days, gathering intelligence and positioning resources. Instead of a dramatic nighttime raid, she proposed a daylight extraction that would blend seamlessly with normal humanitarian activities. The instructors were impressed not just with her creativity, but with her ability to think several steps ahead and account for variables that others missed. As the weeks progressed, the physical challenges increased, but they were designed to test adaptation and problem-solving rather than pure strength. Sarah discovered that her experience with working around her arm injury had taught her to compensate in ways that actually made her more efficient than candidates who relied solely on brute force. During a navigation exercise through difficult terrain, Sarah's team encountered a river crossing that would typically require significant upper body strength. While other teams struggled to find solutions that accommodated their various limitations, Sarah suggested using their constraints as camouflage. They created a crossing method that appeared to be standard outdoor recreation activity, allowing them to move through the area without attracting attention from simulated enemy forces. The most challenging phase of selection came during the 5th week with an exercise called Broken Arrow. Teams were presented with a scenario where half their members were injured and had to complete a complex mission with severely limited capabilities. Sarah's team was told that she and 2 others had lost use of their dominant hands, while the remaining members had various other simulated injuries. The mission required them to infiltrate a facility, gather specific intelligence, and exfiltrate without detection. Most teams approached this as a handicap to overcome, but Sarah realized it was actually an opportunity. Their apparent limitations would make them seem less threatening to security forces and might allow them access to areas that an obviously capable team would never reach. She developed a plan where her team would pose as maintenance workers dealing with various workplace injuries. Their simulated limitations became part of their cover story, making their presence in restricted areas seem completely natural. They successfully completed the mission, while other teams were still trying to figure out how to work around their supposed disabilities. The instructors revealed later that this exercise was designed to test whether candidates could shift their perspective from seeing limitations as obstacles to viewing them as assets. Sarah had passed with flying colors, demonstrating exactly the type of innovative thinking that made Adaptive Solutions Group effective. During the psychological evaluation phase, Dr. Rodriguez conducted intensive interviews with each candidate to assess their mental resilience and adaptability. When she met with Sarah, she was impressed by the transformation in her mindset. The woman who had once seen her injury as the end of her dreams now understood it as preparation for opportunities she had never imagined. Sarah explained that her months of recovery had taught her patience and persistence in ways that her previous successes never could have. She had learned to find alternative approaches when the obvious solution wasn't available, and she had developed empathy for others facing challenges that would be crucial when working with diverse teams in high-stress situations. The final week of selection took place in an urban environment where candidates were tested on their ability to blend into civilian populations while gathering intelligence and completing objectives. This was where Sarah's unique background truly shone. Her experience with adapting to physical limitations had taught her to observe details that others missed and to move through environments without drawing attention. The final exercise was both the most challenging and most realistic. Candidates were given individual missions that they had to complete while potential instructors and role players actively worked to detect and interfere with their activities. Sarah's mission involved gathering information about a suspected terrorist cell operating out of a legitimate business in a busy downtown area. Instead of trying to use traditional surveillance techniques, Sarah applied for a temporary job at a coffee shop across the street from the target location. Her arm injury actually helped her get hired, as the manager felt sympathetic and wanted to give her an opportunity. Over several days, she observed the patterns of people coming and going from the target building while appearing to be nothing more than a hard-working employee recovering from an accident. She noticed that certain visitors arrived at specific times and always used a particular entrance. She observed communication patterns and identified key individuals without ever arousing suspicion. Her intelligence gathering was so natural and thorough that the instructors initially thought she had somehow gained unauthorized access to information about the exercise. When selection ended after 8 weeks, 6 candidates remained. Sarah was not only among them, but had been rated as one of the top performers. Her ability to think creatively under pressure, lead teams through complex challenges, and turn apparent disadvantages into strategic advantages had impressed everyone involved in the evaluation process. Marcus Thompson conducted her final interview personally. He told her that watching her progress through selection had been remarkable, not because she had overcome her physical limitations, but because she had learned to use her unique perspective to approach problems in ways that traditional operators never would have considered. He offered her a position with Adaptive Solutions Group, explaining that her first assignment would involve working with a team of international operators to train Allied forces in unconventional warfare techniques. The mission would take place in Eastern Europe, where political sensitivities required an approach that conventional military forces couldn't provide. Sarah accepted the position immediately. As she prepared for her first deployment, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. The accident that had seemed to destroy her dreams had actually prepared her for opportunities that exceeded anything she had previously imagined. Her first mission exceeded all expectations. Working with a diverse team that included operators from 5 different countries, Sarah helped develop training programs for local forces facing unconventional threats. Her ability to adapt techniques for people with varying physical capabilities and her insights into overcoming adversity proved invaluable. During one particularly challenging phase of the mission, her team encountered a situation where traditional approaches simply wouldn't work. Local forces were demoralized after suffering casualties and were convinced they couldn't compete with better-equipped opponents. Sarah drew on her own experience with feeling defeated and developed a training approach that focused on turning perceived weaknesses into tactical advantages. She taught the local forces how to use their intimate knowledge of the terrain to neutralize technological advantages of their opponents. She showed them how to turn their smaller size and apparent vulnerability into opportunities for deception and misdirection. Most importantly, she helped them understand that limitation and adversity could become sources of strength rather than reasons for defeat. The mission was so successful that Adaptive Solutions Group received requests for similar training programs from 6 other countries. Sarah found herself becoming a specialist in developing unconventional tactics for forces operating under challenging conditions. Over the following months, she deployed to 3 different continents, each time working with teams that included people who had overcome various challenges to reach elite levels of performance. She trained wounded veterans, worked with operators who had sensory limitations, and developed programs for special forces units that included personnel with diverse physical capabilities. Sarah's reputation grew within the private military community. She became known not as the woman who had overcome injury to achieve her dreams, but as an operator whose unique perspective made her one of the most innovative tactical thinkers in the field. Military units specifically requested her input when facing complex challenges that conventional approaches couldn't solve. 2 years after completing selection, Sarah received an invitation that brought her full circle. The Navy SEALs had established a new program focused on unconventional warfare and adaptive tactics, and they wanted her to help develop their curriculum. The same organization that had once rejected her because of her physical limitations now recognized that those limitations had given her exactly the insights they needed. As she stood in the briefing room at the Naval Special Warfare Command, looking at the faces of young SEALs eager to learn new approaches to complex challenges, Sarah realized that her journey had led her to exactly where she was meant to be. She wasn't the person she had planned to become, but she was someone far more valuable than she had ever imagined possible. The broken arm that had once seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of a career that exceeded her wildest dreams. She had learned that true strength came not from physical perfection, but from the ability to adapt, overcome, and find opportunity within adversity. Her greatest limitation had become her greatest asset, and she had discovered that sometimes the most important victories come not from avoiding obstacles, but from learning to transform them into stepping stones towards something better.